Rose is a very beautiful girl who has a pressing problem. Even though she is young, beautiful, and kind hearted, Rose was extremely poor growing up, and her family could barely afford the regular things of life, not to talk of the good things of life. Rose's growing up years were filled with strife and travails. Her problems began when her mother died when she was barely 5 years old, and her father, who worked as a security man in a neighboring village, had to marry a new wife named Madame Alice to help him take care of his house and young Rose. Madame Alice was a very self absorbed young woman and she barely took care of young Rose. Rather, she would spend all their feeding money at the local market getting herself beautiful new outfits and shiny trinkets. At other times, when Madame Alice wasn't at the market square squandering money, she would spend the entire days indoors entertaining different young men whom she liked to call her friends, whilst little Rose would clean the house and make food for herself, Madame Alice, and her visitors. And maybe as a form of gratitude for the meal, or maybe to buy her silence, Madame Alice would encourage Rose to stand by the door with her palms outstretched when her visitors were leaving, and the men in their right would drop gifts into little Rose's outstretched palms. Most of them dropped the same old things like sweets, chocolates, or even a few bright marble stones. But some others were more generous and thoughtful with their gifts, as they would drop big coins or a shiny bubble or two into little Rose's palms. As these events would unfold before Rose's eyes, little Rose believed that any form of affiliation with the opposite sex was a business which the men were meant to pay for. As the days would grow into months and the months became years, little Rose grew up to become a very beautiful young woman, and some of Madame Alice's visitors started diverting their attention to young Rose. The innocent and naive Rose would report any such advances to Madame Alice, and at first, Madame Alice was scared of losing her clientele to young Rose. But one day, she conceived a plan of making more money by using young Rose, and she collected a large sum of money from a very rich old man named Alhaji Kudus with the promise that she would send Rose to him at a certain date. On the night of the appointed date, Madame Alice sent young Rose out to help retrieve her lost jewelry from her old friend Alhaji Kudus. And the young and unsuspecting Rose went to Alhaji Kudus's house, where he had his way with her to his satisfaction. Feeling bitter and angry, Rose got home and reported her dilemma to Madame Alice, whose only response was to shove a few thousand naira notes into Rose's palm, after telling her to keep her mouth shut about the event that transpired between her and Alhaji Kudus. Madame Alice further went on to educate Rose about pregnancy and ways to prevent any unwanted pregnancies. After all these lessons, Madame Alice then took young Rose into the market and got her beautiful new outfits, and also assured young Rose that if she continued to do as Madame Alice, said, then she would be able to afford even more and better outfits. The business between Madame Alice, Rose, and the numerous men continued until one day when young Rose thought to herself how rich she would be if she wasn't with Madame Alice as a middleman between her and her customers. Therefore, Rose decided to cut Madame Alice off and started getting her own men by herself. And she did pretty well at this. In no time at all, Rose had become really rich, and as her riches grew, so did her fame as a runs girl. And men, both young and old, poor and rich, started vying for her attention so as to marry her. But like the Bible said, the love of money is the root of all evil. So the richer Rose got, the more greedy she became, and she would shoo men who were averagely rich, opting to only sell herself to politicians and business moguls. One day, stories spread about a certain young billionaire named Tunde. Even though no one knew what business he was into that got him to be so rich, When the greedy Rose heard about this young billionaire, she started scheming on how to get him to sleep with her because she knew that was a surefire way to guarantee even more money. To accomplish her mission, Rose strategically placed herself at a particular spot where Tunde had his leisures. And as fate would have it, Tunde and Rose's path met and they both set a time to have fun together after they had first agreed on the ridiculous price of 10.2 million naira. Rose went home that night feeling on top of the world, and in little time she started preparing for her tryst with Tunde, the young billionaire. On the day that Rose and Tunde were to meet, Tunde sent a very beautiful and luxurious car to pick Rose up and take her to the airport. And from there, Rose flew first class from Lagos to Tunde's residence in Abuja. Tunde's mansion in Abuja was very beautiful and he had a lot of functions that left Rose feeling wowed. The plan was for them to spend the entire day together and then Rose would leave the day after. So after her arrival, Rose went into the bathroom to freshen up and changed into the expensive bathrobe that Tunde laid out for her. She also sprayed herself with the bottle of expensive perfume that she found alongside the bathrobe. After all those preparations, Rose went outside to the poolside where Tunde was lounging, sipping some lemonade and reading a fashion magazine. Rose and Tunde spent the entire night making sweet love, and the next morning, Tunde put Rose in one of his expensive cars and sent her back to the airport, where she took the next available flight to Lagos, 10.2 million naira richer than she was the previous day. Rose went back to her normal life of shopping, partying, and surfing the internet. And according to their agreement, she never tried to contact Tunde again as they both agreed that their encounter was going to be a one night stand. However, Rose decided to stop her runs business and instead started a real estate business with all the money she had realized from her runs business, and this made her even more money. With her business taking most of her time, Rose forgot all about Sunday the billionaire. But one day, Rose started bleeding excessively, and despite making many trips to the hospitals and seeing a doctor, her condition just wouldn't get better. At a loss for what to do, the desperate Rose ran back to her madam for help after so many years of being away, but to her disappointment, she found Madame Alice lying on her sick bed and dying as a result of a terrible illness which had no cure. Seeing as Madame Alice was in no position to help her, Rose dejectedly returned back to her house to nurse herself back to life. But try as she might, her condition never got better. Rather, she became increasingly sicker as the days went by. The once beautiful and lively Rose became a shadow of herself as the unknown illness kept eating away at her. As a result of this illness, beautiful Rose had to sell off her most of her designer items, which included her beautiful clothes, shoes, bags, wigs, some of her household items, and even her beautiful fast car eventually. And her once beautiful house was now a shadow of its old self. Rose became so sick that and so sad that she barely left her house anymore. She became a recluse and would sit all day at her window watching life pass her by. One fateful day, while she was at the local market trying to get some foodstuff, someone gave Rose a pamphlet inviting her to a church program. And after a few days of deliberation, Rose decided to attend the program, which fortunately for her was to be held in a nearby church. It was at this church that Rose found out Tunde the billionaire wasn't a billionaire at all. Rather, he was a very poor, handsome man who had previously gone to see a very powerful herbalist to help make him rich. The herbalist had then instructed Tunde to give a large sum of money to a very beautiful woman after sleeping with her first. According to the herbalist, Tunde would get back the exact amount he gave to the woman he slept with every night. So Tunde, in return, had sold off his struggling barbecue business and even borrowed a sum of 7.2 million naira from the bank, which he had then given to the beautiful Rose. Rose regretted her actions right from the time she naively went to Alhaji Kudusi's house and to the very moment she decided to sleep with Tunde for money. Feeling remorseful, Rose finally gave her life to Christ, and she spent the rest of her life serving God and educating the young girls about prostitution and the danger it entails.